Ace is back, and she's not in a good mood. So opens the blurb for the 14th book in the Virgin New Adventures series of Doctor Who novels. New Ace had been introduced in April 1993's Deceit, and had not been especially popular. Still, could two newcomers writing together take on the character and lead her in a more likeable direction in her first book as a proper TARDIS companion? No. Welcome back to the Library of St. John the Beheaded, a history of Doctor Who in prose. And this time we'll be investigating Lucifer Rising by Jim Mortimore and Andy Lane. Andy Lane was friends with Paul Cornell and was encouraged to write a Doctor Who novel. He knew Jim Mortimore from working on the Audiovisuals fan audio series. The original concept for the book began as a Mortimore audiovisual script featuring the Cybermen, although they were written out fairly early on. Lucifer Rising is a rare example of a Virgin Doctor Who book with two authors. These would be more numerous in the BBC Books era, and was written in an unusual way. The pair alternated chapters, then passing on their work to be rewritten by the other. The process was clearly effective, as there's no obvious changes in voice or consistency throughout, despite Lane and Mortimer's solo works being remarkably different to each other. The cover was the first to be designed by an author, in particular Jim Mortimore. It's a pretty dynamic image that adds a touch of excitement to the book, although Ace's lip job goes inexplicably unmentioned in the text. That said, I'm getting pretty tired of orange, black and blue being the main colours at this point, partly because it makes choosing different gradients for my YouTube thumbnails that bit more samey. The book opens with a diagram of the planet Lucifer, its orbiting moons, nearby spacecraft and so on. We're clearly in serious science fiction mode this time. It's the first of the V&As to feature illustrations by Lee Brimacombe Wood, and they appear at the start of each part of the book. Prior to the novel's release in May 1993, a prelude featured in Doctor Who magazine issue 199, in which a man named Miles and his daughter plan to leave Earth to start a new life elsewhere in the galaxy. Jim Mortimore has become known over the years, other than for going down one of those terminally online rabbit holes and becoming a deeply unpleasant human being, for his high death tolls, in his books. If you want a book that tortures its characters and then wipes absolutely everybody out, look for Jim Mortimer's name on the cover. Lucifer Rising isn't quite that brutal, but it does open with something that's tonally very Mortimore. Somewhere above a planet called Lucifer, a character called Paula Engardo is falling to her death. I mean, it's a pretty striking way of opening a book. No generic descriptions of the TARDIS control room or people being stalked down back streets by monsters here. Nope, just a woman plummeting to her death. Paula is descended from the Terry Native Americans, which is a hint at a multicultural future which feels very 1990s, although can't really be a plus even if the character's killed off before we get to meet her. We get plenty of different races and nationalities in the book, all striking in their cliches, right down to the rabbi exclaiming "Oi!" It feels a little broad, but it's probably very well intentioned. Again, it's just very 90s in its approach. Part 1, we're in a book separated into parts again, 5 this time, opens with a quote from Isaiah chapter 14 verse 12. Wait, this is exactly the same quote as we had at the start of The Pit. How does that bloody book keep reappearing? The quote even mentions Lucifer, son of the morning, The Pit's working title. Neil Penswick, please leave us alone now. Note that in this book there's a tunnel on Belial known colloquially as The Pit. Anyway, following the biblical quote, we're thrown in at the deep end. This is a story where the Doctor and companions have already arrived. An adjudicator, the 70s hooligan, is pondering the death of Paula, the discontent of the staff of the place he's stationed, and the arrival of a mysterious scientist and his companions. Given the scarcity of TARDIS scenes in the 7th Doctor's era on TV, it's remarkable how often the new adventures open with them. Lucifer Rising is definitely more Cartmel friendly, though. We know the Doctor, Benny and Ace are here before we even know where here is. here turns out to be the Belial base on the moon Belial, orbiting the planet Lucifer. Belial is connected to fellow moon Moloch by an artificially constructed bridge. This bizarre structure is one of the mysteries to be solved in the story. You may have noticed the planet and its moons are named after religious demons, also including Astarte and Demogorgon, because obviously if you discovered a planet and its system of satellites, you'd name them after the devil. It's an entertaining enough concept, but human superstition runs far too deep to make it realistic, especially in a book that emphasises human belief, religion and traditions. We're quickly introduced to our main cast, the employees working on Belial: Miles Engado, Paula's father and the mission leader; Piper O'Rourke, compassionate and eagle-eyed; psychologist Christine Lafayette; Frederic Mosh Raban; married couple Sam and Cheryl Russell; loud and boorish technical supervisor Alex Bannon. There are plenty more to meet throughout the book, but these are the main players. It's tempting to say that this cavalcade of characters is overwhelming. Introducing so many right at the start of the book can be a terrible move, but seen through the eyes of Piper O'Rourke, they're all brought in with a familiarity and humanity that immediately makes them feel like recognisable and rounded people. We witness conversations and arguments that come across completely natural. These conversations also act as a handy way of explaining the situation on Belial. They're all working on something called Project Eden and are desperately low on funds from the distant and tight-fisted Earth Central. And as their project includes the exploration, excavation and, hopefully, understanding the bases and bridge, the ancient structures and systems and mysterious artefacts left behind by who knows what on this bizarre pair of conjoined moons, that money is desperately needed. Something many of the new adventures have done well, and increasingly so as the series has gone along, is world building, and that's very much the case here. The whole setup, a baffling structure that defies scientific understanding, floating above a planet, a base staffed by a diverse and well-rounded crew, with various different interpersonal and professional relationships. It's clear that a lot of thought has been put into the setting of Lucifer Rising. For once, the authors go so far as to put actual science in the science fiction, their characters debating how two moons can hold a geosynchronous orbit despite being different distances above the planet. I don't expect hard sci-fi from Doctor Who. Honestly, I don't really expect sci-fi from it, but it's nice when we get little moments like this. That said, as the previous novel showed us, skill and detail in one area don't always suggest skill and detail in another, so the big question is the story any good? Well, let's take a look at what the story is. The first chapter makes it pretty clear that this is another mystery. I mean, mystery is a pretty good choice for a Doctor Who novel, with action rarely being as effective on the page as on screen. But this isn't a mystery just to the reader. The characters have three mysteries to solve. The first is the big one about the origins of the impossible moons and their ancient science. The second is the mystery of the angels, spectral appearances that aren't quite present and make no attempt to communicate with our main characters. The third is a murder mystery. Who is responsible for Paula Engado's death? The reader also has their own mystery to solve. What's Ace up to? And then, of course, are these mysteries connected? And if so, how? Lane and Mortimer very sensibly set these balls rolling at the very start of the book. Where the last couple of books have gradually mounted up their overlapping narratives into a dung heap of confusion, here we know the basic premise from the very start. But at 346 pages, the longest new adventure to date, and I believe the third longest of all of them, it's also obvious that there'll be no easy answers, and it's best to expect twists and turns. The researchers were initially sent to Lucifer and its moons to find new sources of energy, and their inability to understand all the advanced science present explains their desperation to discover the secrets and how everything is powered. This desperation leads to a very tense scenario where the confined nature of the base and tunnels has everybody on edge, and the matter of funding appearing and reappearing throughout the text. For example, Bannon is frustrated that he's not getting more, i.e. all, of the cash for what he considers his hard science as opposed to everybody else's less objective research. To investigate Paula's death, an adjudicator has been called, and more on adjudicators in a minute, to find out what's happened. As for Ace, well, she's clearly hiding something from the start. She convinces Benny that this would be a great time and place to visit, and has to silence herself from saying too much about why. Technological advancements were mentioned in Peter Darvill Evans's afterword for Deceit as one of the reasons for the limited time frame the new adventures could be set in, with the idea that the further forward you get, the more alien and unknowable the technology would become. Keeping the future limited to a few hundred years would ideally provide a more solid basis for consistent technology over the series. Not that there's all that much consistency regardless, but hey, you have to admire the attempt. It's fascinating seeing 20th century speculative fiction's idea of the future, writers coming up with enormous numbers of wildly vivid and imaginative technologies, yet repeatedly failing to predict the internet. I mean, whatever we have in 130 years' time will undoubtedly be incredibly different to the data networks of today, but even here, with a drone that flies through the atmosphere of Lucifer alongside Paula, filming her final moments and transmitting them back up to base, data is still stored and accessed by that sci-fi staple, the data cube. This does allow for her memorial service to be accompanied by filmed footage of her death, which feels gruesome but all too realistic. On the other hand, these kinds of similarities can be used as evidence in criminal investigations, only with the emotions of those in them exaggerated to make their intentions clearer, which is utterly absurd, and once again not entirely unrealistic. It's also a very quaint moment where Ace considers the DOS systems she used on school computers in comparison with the Strauss ones she was used to from the 25th century. Actually, future history in general provides a lot of discussion material here. The so-called future history cycle, generally considered as the books between Love and War and Lucifer Rising, was never really intended as an arc as such, in the way some forthcoming arcs were, but was merely a collection of stories exploring the New Adventures universe as outlined by Peter Darvill Evans the previous year. While this has mostly provided snapshots of the rather dystopian direction Earth, the solar system and outer colonies headed in, here Lane and Mortimer go into significantly more detail about the future of humanity. The story is set on the eve of the Dalek invasion of Earth, somewhere around 2154 or so. The book contradicts itself in that charmingly slapdash way so many early New Adventures do, and the authors fill us in on the state of things at that point. America's economy collapsed in 2146, leaving 10 million people without food. The Earth government declared bankruptcy, backed by an allegiance of corporations, which would form the backbone of the corporate corruption in charge of expansion into space and colonies being run for profit at the expense of safety and provisions. Islam has become the Earth's major religion. Has someone lent this book to the US president recently, by any chance? Maybe he didn't spot it was fiction. On a similar note, apparently the rules of Galaxy 4 developed a political system in which the uglier they are, the more power they're given. Back on Earth, sheep went extinct during the ozone purge of 2106. There's also a lot of expansion of the show's lore, with plenty of continuity references for those who love or hate them. I fall into both categories, by the way. We both wanted to draw on elements of Doctor Who history we like, such as the future created in Colony in Space, explained Mortimer. Indeed, my mistaken reference to the IMC in my last video was actually meant for this one. The Intergalactic Mining Corporation were introduced in the third Doctor story, Colony in Space, and play a major part in that tale, as do Adjudicators, another element carried over from the story. While originally created simply as a way of bringing the Master into the serial, here they're given significant backstory and developed into a mix of beat cops and street judges. A bureau providing justice to Earth colonies, they have a mixed reputation throughout the galaxy and will be appearing regularly in coming books. Interestingly, the role of Adjudicator in Lucifer Rising was originally intended to be Judge Dredd, in a crossover that would act as a backdoor pilot to Virgin's range of Dredd novels, but the rights couldn't be secured. After centuries of decreasing importance, the Adjudicators became the Grand Knights of Oberon, who count among their members Orsini and Absalom Dark. But that's a long way in the future. The book also reintroduces the titles Crow and Trow, first heard in the Caves of Androzani, as marks of respect. At the time, neither of the authors had any idea how much of the Virgin range was actually being shaped with all this world building. Elsewhere, the Seventh Doctor ensures an immunity virus, probably the one mentioned in the previous novel, allows people to survive the forthcoming Dalek invasion to become the Resistance members his first incarnation teamed up with, or will team up with. The character Piper was married to a man who was on the Hydrax, the craft scene in state of decay, and that latter bit is definitely fanwank. There are also passing references to Vraxoin, Macra, Vega, Croagnon, little bits that straddle the line between unnecessary continuity and simple expansion and world building. Anyway, like all good murder mysteries and single location stories, characters here begin to be picked off one by one. Sam is often in the shower by a shadowy figure. Character with comparatively little development so far, he's an obvious choice to go next, although before his death he and Cheryl notice one of their spacesuits has been interfered with. Frederique Moshraban, a character frequently mentioned but rarely seen, is found stabbed in her room, accompanied by a suicide note also taking responsibility for Paula's death. Clearly a fake then. Jesus, that's a character, no son of God here, is killed when the lift is destroyed in a particularly grim Mortimerish fashion, involving the snapping of limbs and freezing of eyes. While the Doctor is indulging his scientific curiosity and helping with investigations, and Benny is bonding with the crew, Ace is busy being more suspicious. We get an idea of how much she's changed, being unable to enjoy food that isn't military rations, using her cracking skills to bypass passwords, and so on. She steals files and reads others with computerized contact lenses that record what they're seeing. In typical murder mystery style, the potential suspects are shown acting suspicious in various ways. Bannon has a plan, views of his own which will be proved, and only the Doctor could interfere. As things begin to turn to shit, as the base falls apart, Adjudicator Bishop watches dispassionately from his ship and talks to a head adjudicator who seems to already know more than she should about the events on the base. Miles is distant, well beyond the controlled grief for his daughter. Piper has some kind of plan she's worried about Bannon spoiling. The entire population of the Moloch base disappears, leaving only blood behind. A pile of desiccated bodies is soon discovered. As a result, Lucifer Rising ends up the most character-led new adventure to date, even more so than Nightshade. Like that book, characters themselves are the heart of the story here, but this time they aren't simply a means to an end, but the entire purpose. Everybody's motivations, relationships and anxieties are the building blocks from which this part of the story is constructed. And everybody has a tragic story. Bannon's wife and son died in a famine on Earth, so he keeps a similarity, an interactive hologram, of his son as a secret companion on the base with him. Miles plans to kill himself to join his daughter in the afterlife. Christine's mother is incredibly high up in Earth control, and uses her rather than loving her. As for the mystery of the location, for me that's the most interesting. We see fields of mushroom-shaped metallic appendages, computers that respond to emotions of their users, a lift shaft that starts its journey through the centre of Belial by going down, but comes out the other side going upwards. This shimmering, translucent lift between the two moons that travels as and when it sees fit is nicknamed the Bifrost after the Rainbow Bridge of Norse mythology, although the character in charge of studying it being called Heimdall is a bit on the nose. Moloch, the twin moon, isn't seen until halfway through. Unlike Belial, the base here is constructed inside the hollowed-out satellite. A mini Dyson sphere, the moon's inner environment has an artificial sun and is covered in vegetation, including trees which have rudimentary movement. The explanations are typically sciencey and well thought out. The lift between the moons wasn't built as a lift, but as part of a system that captures electromagnetic radiation from the edge of Lucifer's atmosphere, using it to power both bases. So how does this all fit together? Well, the story takes its merry time getting there, with plenty of twists and turns along the way. Cheryl was cheating on Sam with Paula, Ace is believed to be killed in the Moloch base slaughter, the Doctor himself is lost to space when the conference room blows up. There isn't a simple catch-all answer to the mysteries, although all the elements are connected, and ultimately it turns out there's one central villain of a kind. The sabotage and attack on Moloch base are revealed first. These are by the IMC, of all people. Earth having gone bankrupt, they've taken on mineral rights to the Eden Project, and are here to claim them. Unfortunately, the employees are a little over-eager to get their hands dirty in the areas of destruction, murder and sexual abuse. Yeah, unfortunately we get reference to rape here. The IMC mission is led by Legion, a 7-dimensional creature. A fair bit of time is spent on describing why only bits of him can be seen at one time, using a variation on the 3-dimensional object seen from a 2-dimensional perspective routine. The original plan was for Legion to be a member of the Alpha Centauri race. This change was the only significant one to be made after the book's initial proposal. Others of his race will appear in later books. The murderer turns out to be, well, technically nobody. Piper is kind of ultimately responsible, and as the warmest character with no clear motive, she's stood out as a likely subject ahead of more obvious candidates from the start. But by accident. She's being blackmailed by the IMC, pushed to install software to trigger a signal to call them in when she thought the time was most suitable. Only the virus she used to override the base's systems also corrupted the spacesuits, leading to the untimely deaths of Paula and Sam. Ace's mystery is that she's working for the IMC herself and has been all along. And not only has she been sneaky and used the Doctor, but she goes full on IMC, holding everyone at gunpoint, being pretty awful to Benny, generally coming across as a villain, following orders and generally being a brutal soldier. I wonder how many people reading at the time thought this might be the reason she'd been brought back. I mean, that would be a pretty gutsy move, to write Ace back in, only to have her immediately betray the Doctor and become an antagonist. The events taking place here are, a long way in the future, seen as a mystery, other than the system being impossible to navigate. Ace was tasked by the IMC from the future to use the Doctor to access the past and discover what happened, how the system can be used now, and maybe even change the past if possible. She happily takes him up on the deal, relishing the thought of using the Doctor the way he used her in the past. All this gets revealed at the end of Part 3, leaving Part 4 for the fallout of the IMC takeover, and Part 5 as the resolution to the most intriguing elements, the setting and the angels. This feels like the longest section of the book, with most of our answers already supplied and most characters dashing around chased by one IMC bastard or another in a very protracted action sequence. Feels like Part 4 should probably have been a fraction of the length it ended up, as there's just not quite the depth or intrigue that the rest of the book holds. But we do get the answers eventually. In the final part, as the IMC begins stripping away the atmosphere of Lucifer, aided by micro-black holes provided by Legion's race, hence them securing his employment, we discover what's being destroyed. We see a singularity and the incomprehensible extra-dimensional reality on the other side. Reality warps as Bannon uses his knowledge to power up the mushroom field and, unfortunately, kill many of the IMC and Project Eden survivors in bizarre and grotesque ways at the same time. Turns out the whole Two Moons and bridge structure is an enormous morphic field manipulator created to alter the shape and structure, probably DNA as well, of life archetypes. Bannon wants to alter humanity to make it hardier and healthier. Unfortunately, the destruction already wrought by Legion on behalf of the IMC has damaged the system beyond repair, and he won't be able to do this. The angels themselves are the final forms of the system's creators, having altered themselves to have transcended into higher beings. They ultimately seem uncaring but good. They give Paula a funeral, they save Miles from killing himself, they eventually stop the IMC's black holes. They are pretty vague and kind of unknowable, sort of a eldritch wonder if such a thing exists. The mundane human life below is basically their demons in an unusual twist on the Lovecraftian approach. There's a lot of awe-inspiring, mind-boggling description in this final part, the kind of thing that would remain relatively uncommon until some of the stranger 8th Doctor adventures many years later. It's all incredibly imaginative, and like the rest of the book, it hangs together perfectly, not always a given in the new adventures. Slightly less comfortably, the Doctor removes Legion from the story by shooting him, who let Eric Saywood in the room. Those who make it to the final chapter, and there aren't many, this is a book with a pretty high death toll, generally get happy endings. Miles and Piper end up together, clearly comfortably ignoring her complicity in the death of his daughter, and Alex Bannon, in a moment of good, makes up for the guilt of leaving his wife and son to die by allowing himself to be transformed into the new forest inside Moloch, stabilising the system once more. There are probably worse fates for a curious scientist like himself, and he's finally allowed to exist at peace alongside the transformed similarity of his son. As everyone departs, the angels use their unknowable powers to shield the planet from the rest of the universe, setting up the mystery the future IMC wanted solved in the first place. Ace is new Ace, mostly. We learn that she once incapacitated a special weapons Dalek to the extent that it begged to be killed. She also dreams that she's naked and stabbing someone with a knife. I think the big thing here is the revelation that she left the Doctor for Jan out of rebellion. I mean, is there anything of that devastating ending of Love and War left at this point? And her getting one over on him for the IMC here feels very similar. A fair way down the line, New Ace does start to feel like a proper adult character, but here we have another case of her not being any more mature than her younger self, despite maturation being cited as the reason she was removed for 4 books. When she can't get her way, she punches the wall impatiently and moans that she's hungry. She opens doors by kicking them. But as I said, this is only mostly. There are far more egregious examples of her worst elements in the new adventures, and at times it feels like the TV Ace is occasionally popping up here. Of course, the authors wouldn't have had much access to Darvel Evans's books, so would have had little reference on which to base the character. Here she's got her badge-covered jacket and leggings back on, even if they are accompanied by body armour and military boots. She jokes about arriving in a corridor, as usual. Her mood sours pretty quickly, mind, but little moments like those are much treasured in this era. And the tedium quickly reasserts itself when she discusses not being able to wake a sleepwalker in her usual mature adult manner. I could have been standing there stark naked with a banner above my head reading take me, and he wouldn't have batted an eyelid. The new aspect of New Ace is actually utilised in the plot, and that's also not really a given. During an extremely vivid and graphic scene in which several characters die or are injured in a lift accident, Ace remains cool-headed and saves lives by knowing exactly what to do in an emergency. This is the kind of character I wish we'd seen a lot more of. Sadly, once she outs herself as working for the IMC, she reverts to type and becomes military personnel following orders to the letter. Benny now has her hair in dreadlocks. I mean, in Deceit it was short enough to be spiky when washed, and now she's got it in dreads. We even see it in illustrations. Where does this come from? Sometimes wondered if they maybe saw a picture of Cadiatu on the cover of Transit and got the two mixed up. It's nonsense and really should have been picked up by Darvel Evans and Levine at the editing stage. She has some jealousy of the Doctor and Ace's long-held friendship, despite their tension in the book, that will filter through just a tad into upcoming books too. We get a little more history for her, and though she's fairly well renowned as an archaeologist, her career taking off after excavating Ice Warrior citadels on Mars. We also get more hints at trauma of losing her parents at a young age. Bernice enjoyed this trip a little less than her past travels and pins it down to the presence of Ace, having changed the dynamic in the TARDIS. As usual though, she gets the funniest scene in the book, desperately trying to attract the attention of a mobile food dispenser, which is inconveniently ignoring her, dispose of its contents and climb inside in a busy room without anybody noticing. Of course, once she's inside, somebody goes up to it and starts pressing buttons for food. She has to scrabble around to try and find something that she can pass out of the slot to give to them. As for the Doctor, well, he loses his umbrella to an automatic door. Many will have been hoping that would be the last stand of the daft handled thing, but sadly not. He seamlessly flits between his jovial uncle persona and his darker side throughout. Perhaps a little more animated than McCoy ever was on screen, but pretty well captured as a whole. The combination is exaggerated somewhat to allow for a more mysterious feel. This is the same Doctor as seen in Paul Cornell and Andrew Cartmell's novels, one who has a strange power over others, who can walk in and not only be immediately accepted by everyone, but fog their minds as to when and how he arrived. He can pick up an umbrella without anyone seeing him move. He also gets an ache in his knee where one of his companions is in trouble, and can tell who owned a pin badge by licking it. A similarity of his confrontation with Paula is shown from two very different perspectives, highlighting different emotions. Bishop acknowledges the Doctor is seemingly so unknowable that he's able to run 15 different versions of the event and the computer can't work out which is the most likely emotion to be the real one. Amidst all the mystery, world building, character development and betrayal, Lucifer Rising also has great individual moments and scenes. A lot of Wilderness Years books have little Easter eggs and character names, usually they're friends, not uncommonly other Who fans, but here Belial Base counts on its staff one Lars Ulrich. In a moment that foreshadows fish fingers and custard, the Doctor enjoys drinking a glass of strawberry juice and a mug of oxtail soup simultaneously. And in a rare moment of pure silliness, Bishop is seen lounging around in boxers, socks and electrostatic sock suspenders. Other than the 5-part format, the structure is reasonably conventional novel fare. The whole of Part 1 is seen in flashback as recorded by the mini floating drone cameras viewed by the Adjudicator at the start of his investigations. It doesn't end on a cliffhanger, the format fails to completely capture the multi-part TV story structure, but at this point there was still very much this desire to reflect the version of Doctor Who that most people knew best. Part 2 does end on a cliffhanger, and a brilliant one. Bannon has turned a device on that's pulling the moons out of alignment and has no idea how to stop it. Ace is in the lift that's about to be torn apart as a result, and suddenly out of nowhere, Bannon's son appears. It's a really exciting moment that properly captures the spirit of the best Doctor Who cliffhangers. Something that ties it in with the formative years of the show is the time frame. The TARDIS team have been on Belial Station for several weeks by the time the main action takes place. The prose is solid, not always top tier, but the pair can clearly write, especially in the more descriptive sections, at which the two excel. Metaphors are frequently on the darker and more violent end of things, which always feels like a Mortimer thing. For example, conversation in a noisy room isn't simply given up on, it's put in an early grave. Personally, and if you haven't gathered it yet, you will do in later books, I'm not a fan of Mortimer's style at all. It's incredibly serious, almost comically heavy going, and never really varies from that. Here, at least, Lane's breezier style acts as a counterbalance to make the whole thing considerably more readable. The swearometer registers a bastard, a shit, a couple of fucks, an arse, and a rat arse. Lucifer Rising is a solidly, frequently excellently written book with memorable, well-developed characters, a thoroughly original setting that's explored in depth, a consistently engaging series of mysteries, a completely coherent and logical plot, some twists that really work, and a mind-bending yet coherent climax. So why is it that it took me this long to finish it? Other than moving house smack bang in the middle anyway. Truth is, I don't really know. I wondered if Mortimer's generally awful views and attitude hang over my enjoyment of the book, but I don't think that's really the case here. Maybe the fact that despite some humorous moments, it's not a very fun book. Despite a lot of action, it's quite slow. Despite a moral heart, it's quite nihilistic. I was hoping this read-through would shine a light on why this popular and clearly very skilled novel didn't work for me at all first time. Indeed, as I started it, I was gripped and worked through the first 100 pages or so quite quickly, but after that I procrastinated, I picked at it a few pages at a time. I generally resented the time I spent with it. Something art criticism can do is help us understand why we dislike or like specific things, but sometimes that reason remains elusive and it's time to simply chalk it up to taste. Sometimes we just don't vibe with something on a very instinctive level. Maybe it doesn't go deeper than that. I'd recommend Lucifer Rising to anyone who likes a dark and serious Doctor Who novel, or just a good, really well-written sci-fi book with a well-explored mystery at its heart. But I probably wouldn't recommend it to myself again. As always, I'll end on a few favourite passages, and it was quite hard to narrow them down this time. The moment the doors of the blue box opened and a small, rather exuberant gentleman in a gaudy pullover, tartan trousers and brown corduroy jacket emerged, the atmosphere changed completely. Perhaps it was the white Panama hat perched up on his head like a nesting bird. Perhaps the fact that beneath its brim, like two large round eggs, his eyes were bright and full of joyful intelligence. Whatever it was, the sum of all the individual details added up to a personality shining with the conviction that, whatever the situation, whatever the galaxy, it could be grasped as firmly and immediately as the crooked handle of his umbrella. Twirling the umbrella like an old-fashioned propeller, the gentleman looked around, wide-eyed, as if he couldn't believe his luck at landing exactly where he had. A corridor! Yes, but what sort of corridor? What was it a corridor in? Where did it lead? And what adventures were lying in wait for him at either end? They had emerged on the surface of Belial, inside a dome made of some transparent material. In front of them was a circular arena, where a small group of people stood talking. Great rippled sheets of rock marked the boundary of the dome. In the distance, a range of fretted mountains resembled a vast lace curtain drawn across the terrain. The horizon, so close that Ace was conscious of looking downwards at it, was made irregular by the bite-marked craters left by the debris of planetary and solar formation. And above them, dominating everything, was a sight that made Ace's stomach churn. Moloch, the second of Lucifer's moons, hung directly overhead as if about to crash down upon their heads at any moment. Beyond it, the oppressive bulk of Lucifer itself covered more than 3/4 of the visible sky, like the outer ring of some vast bullseye. This is just a short excerpt of an extensive section where Ace gets a good look at the entire system, its celestial bodies and structures, which is probably the most beautifully written descriptive prose in the Virgin New Adventures so far. To top it off, this bit ends with, "Are you impressed?" Christine asked. "Nah," Ace said, "I'm from Perivale." A wave of movement was sweeping across the forest. As it reached each tree in turn, the tree gracefully bent over, curving its trunk so that both roots and branches touched the ground. The branches burrowed into the soil, the roots relinquished their grip. The tree straightened, upside down, a perfect mirror image of itself. As Ardamar watched incredulously, Krieg's voice ran in a liquid stream from her mouth and splashed across her chest armour before hitting the floor in a shower of glowing syllables. Her face creased in horror as she lifted her eyes to his. Behind her, the glow from the pit intensified, spreading throughout the chamber like ripples on the surface of a pond. As the waves began to pulse through his body, Ardamar felt himself begin to change. He tried to scream, but reality wouldn't let him. And that's your lot for this book, and for the future history cycle. After a run of a few books forecasting the gritty and violent future of humanity in the solar system and beyond, we'll be coming back down to Earth for the next novel, and the arrival of another long-running author, David A. McKinty, with his debut novel White Darkness. Before that, do drop me a comment down below. I love reading your thoughts on these books and my videos on them, or press one of the usual buttons, and hopefully I'll be back in the Library of St. John at Beheaded very soon. Do join me then. As one of the reasons for the limited time frame of the new adventures As for one of the reasons for the time limited... What? There's words on the screen, but they don't transfer to my brain. Belial is connected to fellow moon Moloch by an Belial is connected to fellow moon Moloch by an artfully. Yes, well done, Imogen. Belial is connected... It's going to be Belial now, isn't it? I'm going to say Belial 20 times and someone in the comments is going to say, actually it's Belial.